I'm Liz, and honestly, sometimes I feel like fate itself is playing a cruel joke on me because I'm married to the most amazing man I could ever meet, Alex. And every time I look at him when he laughs or brushes his unruly hair off his forehead, I think, oh my God, is this really all mine? Because we're both only 28 and we have our own house, albeit a small one, we pay the bills and carry those endless bags of groceries and live like adults. And there's a heaviness and a sweetness and a special pride in it because it's only been a year since we said "I do" and exchanged rings under the stupid whisper of rain on the porch of an old church. And since then, life could have seemed perfect if not for one little thing that has been gradually eroding me from the inside, like a drop falling on a stone. These little things had names and they wore a mask of decorum. But underneath that mask, there was a toughness, Alex's parents. And please don't get me wrong, I never had any illusions that I would be the perfect daughter-in-law, shining like an angel in family photos. But I also didn't prepare myself to feel unwelcome, like a guest who had been forgotten to be crossed off the guest list. From the very day I first crossed their threshold, I felt like I was entering a lion's cage. And I swear, if I really had a piece of meat dangling around my neck, I wouldn't have felt more vulnerable. His mother, Jane, looked at me as if every movement of my hands, every word that escaped my lips, had to be carefully weighed and compared with her internal standards. And in that first second, I understood. She had assessed me and found me inadequate even before I had time to utter a banal hello. Alex had warned me, of course. In the car, on the way to see them for the first time, he had squeezed my hand lightly and said, almost in a whisper, "Mom can be a little over the top sometimes, but please don't take it too seriously." And I had sworn to myself that I wouldn't, that I would keep my cool because we were going there as a grown couple, and no one had the right to throw me off balance. But as we sat at dinner and I, trying to show concern, extended the salt across the table, Jane suddenly turned to her son and said with tender longing in her voice, "You know, Stephanie always cooked such amazing dishes. Do you remember that risotto with honey?" And Alex, clenching his jaw so hard that his face was drawn into hard lines, just nodded briefly, "Yes, I remember," and didn't look at me. At that moment, I sat with the salt shaker in my hand, like some ridiculous symbol of my defeat, and I felt transparent, like a ghost. At the table, everyone was talking about some Stephanie, as if I didn't exist at all, as if I'd been invited only as an extra. And I felt a sharp pain in my chest, the kind that makes you want to grab your heart with your hand. But I just curled my lips into a smile and said quietly, "It seems like she really was a great cook." Our eyes met and Jane smiled back at me, but that smile was cold, mechanical, and I saw that her eyes remained icy, alien. That evening, when we got home, I told Alex everything that was building up inside. It was as if she was comparing me to some kind of ghost, to this Stephanie who probably disappeared from your lives long ago, but now it's like she's sitting with us at the table again. Alex held me tightly, his arms warm and safe, and he whispered into my hair, "You're the one I chose, Liz, and that's all that matters." And I wanted to believe him so much, but deep down I already knew that Jane had her own plans, her own designs, built for many years to come. And I was just a piece on her chessboard, a pawn to be sacrificed, and I would fully understand this later. In the meantime, I had my own shadow, my own cross to bear, allergies. Living with them was like walking through the world with a traitor over your shoulder who whispers in your ear every day, "Be careful, danger is near." Since childhood, peanuts have been my personal enemy. I remember how it began, a spoonful of peanut butter in the school cafeteria, a few minutes of laughter with my friends, and then the sirens, the pale faces of my parents, and the cold light in the emergency room. From then on, my parents received a clear, almost scorched warning. Keep her away from nuts and a whole host of other foods if you wanted her to grow up. But it wasn't just peanuts. The list of enemies was long: soybeans, peas, cherries, almonds, tomatoes, apricots, bananas, and even, get this, potatoes. All of these were poison to me, and I grew up as if I were imprisoned in a glass cage where every meal was a lottery and where a mistake could cost me my life. It's the kind of list that makes waiters raise their eyebrows as if I've just told them a story from a medical textbook, and makes friends hesitate painfully before inviting me to dinner because no one wants to be in the awkward situation of having guests eat while you sit and sort through the menu like a sapper in front of a minefield. But the most disgusting thing about this list is not the looks from strangers or the jokes from acquaintances, but the fact that my mother-in-law, Jane, knows it by heart, maybe even better than I do, and yet every time she puts on a show as if she's never heard that I can't have this or that, and starts asking her sticky questions. "Are you sure, Liz, that you can't even have a piece of this pie? It's just almond extract, just a little bit," she said in a voice that was both falsely concerned and coldly doubtful, as if I had invented an allergy to get attention. I smiled, although inside I was seething, and answered the usual: "Yes, thank you, better not to risk it." But inside, I wanted to stand up and shout that I was not some picky girl, but a person who could die from her drop. Every family dinner turned into the same dance. I was polite and careful. She was caring with poison in her words. I remember how once, at a large gathering of her relatives, where the table was groaning with food, I stood in front of the buffet, and my mental blacklist ran through my head, and my heart beat faster with fear that I would accidentally put on my plate what would be my last supper. Alex was nearby, holding the plate and diligently helping me choose at least something safe, but then Jane intervened. Her voice, sweet and deliberately friendly, cut through the air. "Liz, you should definitely try this casserole. I made it especially for everyone." She highlighted my name as if she were saying, "Look, I'm thoughtful," but the glint in her eyes said otherwise. Alex froze, fork in hand, as if he sensed a threat, and asked calmly but firmly, "Mom, you used cream of mushroom soup in this, right?" He knew full well that most brands contained soy, and for me, that was a big no. And then her smile faltered for a moment. A shadow of irritation flashed across her face, but then she put the mask back on and shrugged. "Oh, I think it should be okay." But we both knew it wasn't, and I left the casserole untouched. On the outside, it looked like a tiny incident, but inside, it was imprinted like a burn. It was a small victory in a war where the kitchen was her territory, and I walked in, unarmed, every time. Little by little, I learned to navigate this treacherous world of cautious steps. Never eat anything that looks suspicious. Always check labels, carry medications with you, and figure out how to politely refuse in advance so as not to look ungrateful. Eating out became a whole strategic operation where my life was at stake. One day, Alex and I went to our favorite Italian restaurant, a rare place where they understood that food allergies are not a whim. The waiters there already knew us by sight, and when I, as usual, uttered a whole tirade about peanuts, soy, and my entire list of prohibitions, the waiter did not roll his eyes or smirk, but simply nodded seriously and said, "Understood. Everything will be under control." Alex looked at me with his soft eyes that always knew how to say without words, "Are you okay?" and asked out loud, quietly, almost tenderly, "So, is everything okay?" I nodded, adjusting the napkin in my lap, and said, "Yeah, everything is okay. I just hate making a fuss every time." He chuckled, but his voice was half serious. "Liz, you're not making a fuss. You're just trying not to die." And despite my anxiety, I laughed, grateful for how easily he could lift the weight off my shoulders. Well, when you say it like that. After dinner, we went outside, and the air was fresh. The sky was clear, strewn with stars, like a black canvas with a scattering of light. I held his hand, and for the first time in a long time, I felt light and happy, as if these stars were just for us. But at that very moment, my phone vibrated in my bag. I pulled it out, and the screen lit up with a message from Jane. Her words, short and slippery, lay cold on my heart. Be careful, Liz. Not everyone takes your illnesses seriously. I wouldn't want anything to happen to you. And it wasn't the wish of a caring mother, but a warning veiled as concern, a cloud that blocked out the moon, leaving me feeling like I was playing a game where my life was at stake, and I didn't write the rules. I read the message out loud to Alex, and as if he were afraid that Jane's words might hit me harder than poison, he immediately put his arms around me, pulled me close, and quietly said, "She's just trying to get to you, Liz. Don't take her seriously." But no matter how hard I tried to cling to his confidence, somewhere deep inside me there was another feeling growing, sticky, cold, and it whispered that her words weren't just a jab, not another petty sarcasm, but a warning veiled in concern, a reminder that my allergies made me not just special, but vulnerable, and not just to the occasional peanut crumb or soy sauce, but to people like her, those who saw it as a weakness and tried to press where it hurt the most. I spent the rest of the drive home in silence, looking out the window at the flickering lights and thinking about how many moments there had been when everything had hung by a thread. A mistakenly cooked dish at a party, someone else's fork falling into my salad, the smell of peanut butter in the room, and how each of these situations could have ended in disaster. I suddenly realized that it wasn't even the no-no list, or the peas, or the tomatoes. It was that my allergies were a crack in the armor I wore before the world, and that crack was something that people like Jane could use as a weapon. And that thought scared me more than the memories of my own attacks, when my throat would tighten and my breath would turn into a wheeze. Every time I ate dinner at Jane's house, I felt not like a guest, but like an outside actress on a stage where the play had long been staged, the roles had been assigned, and everyone was playing them flawlessly except me. I was cast as the wild card, the one who could ruin a family dinner with one awkward bite, and the role stuck to me like glue. Alex tried his best to smooth things over, but what could he do when the battleground was her home, her kitchen, her rules? One evening, the tension became almost palpable, thick as the rich gravy she ladled out as if to make me sick with the smell. Jane bustled around the table, serving dish after dish, smiling, chattering, and everyone around her seemed to be playing a part in her performance. I sat in front of an empty plate, trying to figure out what was on this table that wouldn't send me to the hospital. And then her voice, sickeningly sweet, cut through the air. "Alex, honey, pass Liz the green beans. They're absolutely divine." The words came out so warmly that to a stranger she might have thought she genuinely cared, but to me they were tart, and my heart sank. I looked at the beans and felt a strange uneasiness, as if something was wrong. Jane, noticing my pause, added lazily, "Oh, just a few flaked almonds on top for crunch," and waved her hand as if it was a small thing, as if I was being picky. I raised my hand sharply, preventing Alex from reaching the dish. "I can't eat these." "I can't have almonds, Jane." She feigned surprise, pressed her palm to her chest, and drawled, "Oh God, I must have forgotten how stupid I am." At that moment, Alex's chair creaked, and he stood up abruptly, and there was a firmness in his voice that I rarely heard. "Mom, this is serious. Liz could end up in the hospital. This is not a joke." I saw her eyes narrow in disappointment, as if she didn't like that her son had sided with me so openly. She immediately changed her mask and said almost with offense, "I just wanted to do something nice. It's not my fault Liz has so many allergies." And at that moment, there was silence, so awkward that even the sounds of forks hanging in the air became audible. The relatives looked at each other as if they didn't know where to look, and every glance that fell on me burned my skin. I felt the blood rush to my face and the heat rise from shame, not because I had allergies, but because the whole family was looking at me again, as if it was my fault that I almost got into danger. Alex's father, Mark, cleared his throat, trying to defuse the situation, and said, "Well, let's just enjoy the food, okay? I'm sure Liz will find something to eat." But it was too late. The damage had already been done, and I knew that this dinner would be remembered not for the taste of the food, but for how easily Jane had managed to make me look weak, ungrateful, and out of place at their table. The rest of the meal dragged on like cold gum, in sticky politeness, every word stretched to a crisp, and I could feel Jane studying me surreptitiously, asking more and more questions about my allergies, not in a way that would inquire, but more as if she were taking notes for a future attack, noting down my every weakness so she could point it out again later. When we finally left and were home, Alex apologized quietly. "I'm sorry, Liz. I should have double-checked before we came." I shook my head, too tired to be the problem to be solved, like I was a project with irreparable flaws rather than a wife. "It's not your fault," I said, "but I'm starting to think your mother does it on purpose." He didn't say anything, and there was no need for him to stay silent. We both knew the truth, but it was easier to pretend she was a little distracted than to admit that her every move was laced with anger. Jane served our dinners, but she carried a lot of poison with them, and I was her main course. I learned to recognize when she was working with Alex, as if she was slowly forcing her words under his skin, because he would have that special, distant look in his eyes, as if he were looking at me but through me, comparing what I was saying to what his mother had already whispered to him. That night, he sat down next to me on the couch, but there was a cloud around him. I could feel it before he even opened his mouth. "Mom thinks we should think about it," he muttered, fiddling with the TV remote, not looking at me. "Think about it?" I asked, feeling a cord snap inside me. "Well," he sighed, "she thinks maybe we don't think about the future enough." I tensed, and the words came out sharply. "The future?" Alex nodded, still staring at the plastic remote. "Yeah, the kids, and your health problems." The word problems hung in the air, heavy as a stone, and I felt my chest tighten as if someone had pressed an elbow into my ribs. "Did she talk to you about me again? About all this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Liz, she's just worried," he breathed, finally putting the remote down. "She thinks it's going to be too hard for us, especially if we want to start a family." I lifted my chin, seething inside. "We've talked about this before, Alex." "I'm coping. Haven't I proven that? There are plenty of people with allergies who have kids, and they live, and they're fine." Alex ran a hand through his hair, and I knew it was his sure sign that he was cornered. I know, he said. "She just has this way of making me doubt." The room fell silent, taut as a rope, and I looked at him. The man I loved, the man his mother still knew how to push where it hurt, planting seeds of doubt. I heard my own voice, barely audible but shaking with tension. "Alex, are you doubting us?" He looked up sharply, his eyes clear as light through water and firm. No, I don't doubt it. I just hate that she keeps bringing it up. I hate that it makes us fight." I reached out and took his hand, and when our fingers intertwined, I wanted to believe that the grip would be enough to hold us. "We're not fighting," I said softly. "We're on the same side." He nodded, hugging me, pressing me to his chest, and his voice sounded almost like a vow. "You and me against the world." "That's right," I said, nuzzling my face into his shoulder. But underneath all the tenderness, I knew that Jane's words weren't just barbs. They were seeds she was planting in our lives that could grow, turn into weeds, and choke out everything beautiful we had. And then I knew. It wasn't just the allergies I was dealing with, but the doubts that were like poison, seeping into the smallest cracks in even the strongest relationships. The news of my pregnancy hit us like thunder, except that it was a warm, welcome thunder, bringing joy to Alex and me. But with that joy came shadows, because for everyone else, especially Jane, it was a test that required her to play a role she clearly wasn't prepared for. That day, when Alex and I gathered in his parents' living room and broke the news, I saw her face freeze for a second, as if the system inside her had frozen and rebooted, and then the "mother who should be happy" program kicked in. A pause, long and taut as a rope, and then a smile so mechanical I wanted to ask if the gears inside her were creaking. "We're having a baby, Mom," Alex said, and his voice was full of pride and caution and that subtle willingness to take a hit if it came. "That's wonderful," Jane managed, and even those simple words sounded like she'd rehearsed them in front of a mirror. She added that we should have a family dinner to celebrate, and I immediately felt something inside me jump. Dinners at Jane's were never just meals. They were always like dramas, with everyone having a role to play, and I was the eternal outsider. But Alex looked at me with such hope, with such a light in his eyes, that I nodded, although my heart was heavy. When the night of the dinner arrived, the house was a hive of family, laughter and smells too rich to be casual. Jane flitted around the room, her movements as polished as a show hostess's, moving from guest to guest with a grace that seemed almost human. But I could see the cold work hidden behind her smile. As she approached us, her smile widened, but it did not warm her. "Congratulations, Liz. This is such a joyous occasion," she said, her voice as even as an announcer's. "Thank you, Jane," I said, matching her formality, because I knew that any excess of emotion would be perceived as weakness. Alex put his arm around my waist, pulled me closer, and with that simple gesture said more than any words could. "Thank you for playing along, for not making a scene." When the moment came to sit down at the table, I felt anxiety spread inside me, as if someone had poured cold water over me. The table was laden with food, a real feast, but for me it was a minefield. Each dish could be my death, each touch of a spoon or fork, Russian roulette. Today I desperately hoped that everything would be different, that Jane, at least for the sake of her future grandson, would put away her poisonous arsenal. Everyone sat down, and I immediately felt eyes on me, as if everyone was waiting for me to make the first move, where I would reach, how I would behave. I reached for the vegetables, then for the rice, the simplest, purest things that I could be sure of. But as soon as I touched a piece of bread, Jane gently but abruptly stopped me. "Actually, maybe not this one is better." Her voice sounded almost caring, but there was an underlying current of tension in it. "I'm not sure if the baker used soy flour." I paused with the bread in my hand and looked up at her, and there was something odd in her gaze. Maybe alarm, maybe defiance. "Thank you for telling me," I said, putting the bread down, even though all the alarm bells were already ringing inside me. How did she know about soy flour? It was too precise, too convenient, as if she had orchestrated this moment in advance to demonstrate that she knew more than I did, that she was in control. The rest of the meal passed in a haze for me, eating slowly, almost automatically, while the congratulations of relatives and the clink of glasses merged into the background. But all evening I could not shake the feeling that this holiday was not a holiday, but a masquerade, and that behind the smiles and the sliced fruit there was a trap set, waiting only for this very moment. The family dinner, arranged in honor of our future child, was not a celebration for me, but a banquet, where, under the applause and toasts, I had to play the role of a happy daughter-in-law, knowing full well that behind every word Jane was a knife point. Jane outdid herself that evening. Her table was so laden that even a traditional Thanksgiving dinner would have seemed like a wretched snack in a school cafeteria next to this. But my stomach was clenching, not from hunger, but from fear, because every plate, every bowl, every sauce could turn out to be a death trap, hidden under the shine of gravy or the sweetness of cream. As we sat down, the air was full of animated voices, gossip about distant cousins and neighbors, a noise that seemed to cover a real theater. And Jane, sitting at the head of the table, was its director and queen at the same time, directing with her gaze and her gesture. She tapped her glass lightly, calling for attention, and her voice was coolly even. "I just want to say how excited we are to celebrate the addition of Alex and Liz to the family." The room erupted in applause, too loud, too fast, as if everyone knew. This is how it should be, this is how it should be, this is how she demanded it. I forced a smile onto my face, although everything inside was shaking, and felt Alex squeeze my hand under the table, as if trying to keep me afloat. "Thank you, everyone," I managed to say. "We are looking forward to this new chapter in our lives." After that, the food arrived, and I, like a sapper, carefully selected the dishes, pushing a piece of fried potato around the plate, afraid to bring it to my lips. Alex had been watching me the whole time, his brow furrowed, and he leaned toward me quietly. "Are you okay?" I nodded and almost whispered, "Yeah, just be careful." But Jane was clearly not going to let me go. Her eyes were boring into me from across the table, and her voice was ringing with feigned cheerfulness. "Liz, you haven't even touched the salad. I specially put the dressing on the side just the way you like it." I looked up and smiled as gently as I could. "Thank you, Jane, but I don't have much of an appetite today." I knew that there could be anything hidden behind that salad, from soybean oil to nut dust, and one spoonful could turn into a disaster for me. The minutes dragged on, and with each "try this" or "just a little bit of that," the tension in the room grew thicker like smoke. The walls seemed to draw closer, and I found myself breathing too fast. And then she brought out the cake. Big and beautiful, layered with frosting and chocolate chips, it immediately drew choruses of oohs and ahs from the guests. Jane stood up, cut it herself, and with a smile that was too even, too demonstrative, she handed me the plate. "Try it, Liz." I looked first at the cake, then at Alex, then straight into her eyes. "I really shouldn't," I said quietly, but added, "It looks delicious, though." Jane leaned a little closer, and her voice became so sticky that I could taste the sweetness on my skin. "Oh, come on, one little piece won't hurt the baby." The words sounded like an order, hidden behind a mother's concern. And then something happened that I was not expecting. Alex's father, Mark, who had been sitting quietly as a shadow, suddenly reached out and with a quick movement knocked the plate of cake right out of my hands. The piece fell to the floor with a dull thud, the frosting smeared across the carpet, and the room fell silent so thickly that it seemed as if even the candles had stopped flickering. "What the hell?" Alex shouted, his voice a mixture of anger and complete confusion. Mark was standing at the table, and even though his face had turned chalky pale, his voice was firm, without a single tremor, as if he had been preparing for this moment in advance. "I saw the label in the trash can," he said, and his words cut the air like a knife. "There is peanut butter in the cake." At that moment, the room exploded like a powder magazine, overflowing with arguments and shouts. The faces of the guests and relatives stretched out in masks of horror, and I felt as if the chair had suddenly disappeared under me, and only Alex's hands, sharply squeezing the edge of the table, kept me in this reality. Jane's face was a picture of feigned shock. Her mouth opened, her eyes widened, but I saw it was her eyes that betrayed her. It was they that gave away what was hidden under the mask. Something slippery, dark flashed in them, similar not to surprise, but to fear or even guilt. Alex jumped up so abruptly that the chair fell back with a crash, and his voice sounded sharp like a command. "Mom, did you know about this?" He did not ask. He demanded an answer. Jane opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, like a fish thrown ashore, but not a sound escaped her lips. And in that moment, it all became clear to me, so clear that it made my insides go cold. The truth was lying right in front of us, like a danger on a plate from which I had barely escaped. The silence in the room became thick and viscous. All eyes were fixed on Jane, and the piece of cake, flattened on the floor, no longer looked like a dessert, but like evidence at a crime scene. "Mom, is it true?" Alex's voice cut through the tension like an axe through dry wood. "Did you know?" His eyes burned in a way I had never seen before. Something dark flashed in Jane's eyes before she managed to collect herself and squeeze out the words, "Of course not, I would never." But her voice was weak, unconvincing. It melted in the air, finding no support. And then Mark spoke again. He no longer tried to soften, did not look away. "I saw the shopping list, Jane. Peanut butter for the cake. It was right there, in your handwriting." His voice was even, almost calm, but there was a disappointment in that evenness that hit her harder than any screaming could have. There was a murmur around the table, the relatives exchanging glances, some covering their mouths, some shaking their heads, and the whole mixture of disbelief and anger hung in the air, turning the living room into a courtroom. Alex shook his head, his hands clenched into fists, and he almost shouted, "How could you, Mom?" Liz could have died. I sat transfixed, feeling the gravity of this pressing against my chest like a slab of concrete. This was not forgetfulness, not carelessness, not an accidental mistake. It was intentional. And in that moment, the mask Jane had worn for years finally slipped. Her face twisted with anger, and the words came out like poison. "I didn't mean for it to come to this, but she's not right for you, Alex. She's weak. And now she's going to bring a child into this world who will be just like her." Alex took a step toward his mother, his voice full of disbelief, pain, and rage. "Weak? Liz is the strongest person I know. And you? How could you be so cruel?" Every eye in the room turned to me, as if waiting for me to break, to cry, to crumble under the weight of those words. But I didn't let them. I raised my head and said, surprisingly calmly, in a voice that sounded firmer than I expected, "Jane, you've made it clear what you're thinking about me. But this isn't just about me. This is about family. This is about your granddaughter." Jane turned away, her jaw clenched, and for the first time I saw fear in her eyes, real and not fake. Maybe she realized that she had put not only my life at risk, but also her bond with her son and her reputation with the rest of the family. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. People talked in hushed tones, some cried, some argued. Mark and Alex spoke to Jane in hushed tones, but the tension was escaping like smoke from a crack. I felt empty, but at the same time strangely whole, because the truth had finally come out. Alex and I left before everyone else, and the silence on the way home was so thick that it felt like we were driving through it. Words were unnecessary. Everything was clear. That evening, the facade behind which this family had hidden for years collapsed, and with it, what had recently seemed eternal. Everything collapsed because of a piece of cake. The drive home dragged on forever. The night seemed thicker than usual, and only the hum of the tires on the asphalt reminded us that the world around us continued to move, even if everything inside us froze. And the silence in the car was so thick that I felt it on my skin, as if it were not air, but a heavy blanket thrown over us. When we finally crossed the threshold of our house, we stopped in the hallway, as if we did not know what to do next, and the echo of that evening still sounded in our ears, tearing us apart from within with memories of screams, tears, and that damned piece of cake that became the point of no return. Alex was the first to break this oppressive silence. His voice sounded low, empty, as if from somewhere deep in the mine. "I can't believe that my own mother would do something like this." There was more than anger in his words. There was the resentment of a boy who was betrayed in the most cruel way. I sank down on the sofa, but even the soft pillow brought no comfort. It felt like stone under my back. "I know how hard this is to accept," I said quietly, staring into space, and he sat down next to me, taking my hands in his fingers trembling, and for the first time in a long time, I saw in his eyes that defenselessness that he always tried so hard to hide. "I'm so sorry, Liz. This is unforgivable," he said, and there was no usual strength in his voice, only pain and emptiness. I looked at him, and my heart sank from the fact that he blamed himself for something that could not be his fault. "It's not your fault, Alex." I shook my head. We couldn't have known that she would go so far. But the truth hung between us, so simple and so terrible. Jane had crossed the line, and there was no turning back. The family was split in two. Some took our side, shocked by her actions. Others rushed about, trying to find an excuse, as if it was possible to explain the betrayal with something other than cold calculation. The following days were like a storm. Alex's phone never stopped ringing. Calls, messages, words of support, words of regret, attempts at reconciliation, everything mixed into one. People I knew only superficially suddenly began to pour out their emotions, their apologies, and in the midst of this stream of sounds and letters, there was a frightening emptiness. Jane's silence. Not a call, not a letter, not an attempt to explain, not a single word. She chose silence, and this silence cut more than any screams. A week later, Alex sat down next to me and said, "Her father left her. He said he couldn't get over what she did, that it had been building up for a long time. I listened to him and didn't know what to feel. Relief? Sadness? Pity? Everything was a mess inside me." "What about Jane?" I asked uncertainly, and he looked away. "She's not coping well." "She's alone now," he said, and there was something in his voice I never thought I'd hear after everything that had happened. Regret, quiet and stubborn, like the scar of an old wound. We sat in our living room, and I looked around. The walls we'd painted together, arguing over which shade would be warmer. The sofa we'd chosen, dragging ourselves wearily from store to store. The photographs on the shelves that reflected our lives, simple and vivid. This house was ours, filled with our memories and love, and I could feel the storm brewing outside its walls, threatening to tear away everything we held dear. But in that moment, I knew that no matter what storm was coming, we were together, and that together was stronger than any disaster. Alex leaned over, pulled me close, and said, "I love you, Liz." His voice was shaking, but there was a promise in that shaking. "I love you too," I whispered, pressing my face into his shoulder, and the words were simple, but they were all we had left. The effects of that night will never go away. The scars on our family will take a long time to heal, but when I looked at Alex, at the life we had built with our own hands, and at the future that lay ahead, I knew that we would weather any storm. Jane would be part of our story, but not what defined us. She was a chapter we closed, a book we put on a shelf with no desire to return. Ahead of us was only us, our child, and the road that awaited us. And no matter how easy or rocky it turned out to be, we would face it together.